Okay, I have the
I'm escaping them.
distinct honor of introducing the Southbound Trade-Reshoring program to you. And I want to let you know that I will do the identification, but we do have an important personality that's come down from the White House, Cesar, at our invitation. As I mentioned earlier today, this program has had a little brief introduction up on the hill to a couple of members of some very senior people up on the hill. The other piece that I want you to know is that this program, this concept laid out by Ernesto. Can you hear me now? Is it better? The problem is the mic is designed for somebody that's shorter legs than me. So, and Ernesto laid this whole concept on the international section of the American Bar Association last year, and particularly the lawyers from Central and South America were really just excited as can be about this. So I have the honor to introduce the architect of this whole concept for the National DEC as a co-chair of the Trade Policy Committee. I got to tell you about Ernesto Pinal. And I have a really impressive bio here that I'm going to tell you a little bit about, but there's something about Ernesto that you really need to know that's not on the bio. And that is that some of you may know, Ernesto is a product of NAFTA. And I mean, truly, he is a real product of NAFTA. I mean, the guy has roots in Mexico, born in Canada, and is an American. I mean, where else could you find somebody that has that kind of roots? So he's a NAFTA kid, and Ernesto is an engineer by training, and he's got all kinds of exposure in that career of his to various areas of product development and international business, particularly in the high-tech industry. And he's got about 15 years of leadership experience and all kinds of broad business knowledge, and has a master's in education, business, and engineering from McGill University. See, that's the Canadian lookup is McGill. And he's had a number of corporate positions in Fortune 500 companies. Ernesto, I can't go through this whole thing because if I do, you won't have any time to examine it. So, but I want you to know that he was recognized by the Small Business Administration in 2015 as the Exporter of the Year. He got the award in 2014. The U.S. Idaho Department of Commerce gave Ernesto an export award. This whole concept that we're talking about here in this program is I mentioned this to you before. This is the very first trade initiative that's come out of the National DEC and the DEC organizations in its history. It's one that has been led and shaped by Ernesto Pinal. So with that, would you give a warm welcome to our chief architect of the Southbound Trade Initiative?
Thank you very much, David, for that kind introduction. At some point I was wondering if there's another somewhere here that I'm missing. Is he talking about me? all those good words. I will just make a quick clarification of what he said because it's kind of a funny comment. So I will say that I'm Canadian by legal ties. I'm Mexican by heritage, but I'm an American by choice. So I want you all to know that, okay? Now, without further delay, I will start introducing my panel. But before I do that, I would like to apologize on behalf of the Colombian Embassy. We had convoked and they have accepted very kindly the participation by Dr. Valdivieso. Unfortunately, they had an outbreak and they have to be in isolation, so they decided not to come, and they asked me to very, very kindly apologize on their behalf. I will try to cover as much as I can some of the information related to Colombia, but so you know, that's why you saw it in the program, that the participation of Dr. Valdivieso. But we have a super good panel here, and let me start by introducing my panelists. Let me start with Minister John Layton from the Canadian Embassy to the US. John joined the Canadian Embassy as Minister of Economic in September 2021. In his capacity, he has overseen the embassy trade, economy, and business development programs. Also, he has been the Director of Trade Remedies at Global Affairs Canada, serving as Canada's NAFTA negotiator for Chapter 19 Disputes Section. He also has been a Director of the Trade Rules Division and lead negotiator for the World Trade Organization Rules Negotiating Group and Canada's head of delegation for the North American Steel Trade Committee. They also have from the Mexican Embassy to the US, Minister Cesar Remis. He is the head of the Office for Implementation of the United States, Mexico, and Canada Free Trade Agreement, or the USMCA. He has served as head of International Trade Negotiations Unit at the Ministry of Economy, as Minister of Economic and Tourism Affairs at the Embassy of Mexico in Canada, so some time ago. He has also served as Mexico's chief negotiator for new trade agreements with the UK and with the Associated States to the Pacific Alliance. He chaired the Administrative Commission of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP. And I guess that's probably the most relevant stuff. I hope that I'm not missing any very key part, but that's enough of the credentials, I think, to see what kind of panel I have here. So, but I'm going to divide this session in 3 sections. Section number 1 is, I'm going to speak for about, and I promise it will be about 5 or 6 minutes, that's it. And I want to give you context of what has been accomplished in North America as a region that has been integrated, because that model serves as a roadmap to understand what can be done further south from North America and what are the benefits that we could perhaps accomplish and expect. So the name of this panel is Southbound Trade Initiative. By the way, it's an initiative sponsored by the National Association of District Exports Council, and it was officially launched in February of 2022, so just a couple of months ago. And it's a first approach to trade, reshoring, and national security in the Americas Hemisphere's free trade agreements. Why is it important to talk about North America? Because it's a case study that we can be very proud of what has been accomplished in the last 30 years. And by nature of geography, this integration process started even before 30 years ago. But it provided, we really had a formal framework of work with the implementation of the NAFTA 27 years ago. And as a result of that, we have today a common area with a GDP of $24 trillion, a population of 492 million consumers. It's a great and very dynamic hub for international trade, and the economies have been highly integrated, and we have several examples that illustrate that. Banking is one of them, automobile industry, aerospace. I could go on and on, but I'm not, I don't want you to fall asleep, so I won't go into much detail. I just want to present the overall picture. Now, what has been accomplished? This is a very interesting chart that I want you to pay attention to. In the business community, there is often the misunderstanding that China is the trade partner number 1, and it's an important trade partner, but it's number 3. So the first ones are Mexico and Canada. And as a matter of fact, these numbers come from 2019, and it's purposely. I select them from 2019 purposely, because 2020 and 2021 with COVID and with all the disruptions are not really representative. So the last numbers that we have that are consistent, that we can rely on and do some serial interpretation is 2019. And I think once this COVID situation is gone and we are able to put back the supply chains, we will see very similar numbers. They will continue to grow, but I want you to pay attention to the first 2 columns. In 2019, the number 1 partner of the US was Mexico. And the second one, just for very, very, very little, was Canada. Pretty much they kind of share year by year. Sometimes it's Canada, sometimes it's Mexico, but they are not very far from each other. Then the third one is China. What I want you to pay attention is the green and the red colors, because they mean imports and exports. So you can very clearly see that in the case of China, it's very unbalanced. We have a lot of imports and very little exports. So that's the reason why we have to start thinking from a different angle about that. And then you can see information about investment. I will skip a little bit of that. I want you to show you, in terms of employment, what it has meant for the US, this integration with Canada and with Mexico. And you can see by state how many direct jobs depend entirely from trade with Mexico or the US. And of course, California is number one, Texas is number two. This is not a coincidence. This is a reflection of the demographics of the states. The largest states have more to lose and more to win, and so on. But the interesting thing here is to look at the 5 million direct jobs that depend entirely from that trade. And there are another 8 million indirect jobs that also depend from this trade with Canada and Mexico today. Canada is the number one customer of 30 of the US states. Mexico is the number one customer of 7 of the US states, and is the second just after Canada for another 19 million. So right here you can see the picture, this interrelation that I was talking about. And it goes investment, job creation, etc., etc. Now, what happens in the Americas? This is something very interesting. These are the trade blocks that exist today in the Americas as a continent. We have the USMCA, we have the CAFTA, we have the Pacific Alliance, and we have Mercosur. I want you to, on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see the GDP, the population, and the amount of trade that each of these regions generate as of 2019. At the bottom, on the right-hand side, at the bottom, you will see some numbers in red. I want you to pay attention to that. Today, the Americas as a region or as a continent generates a GDP of $30 trillion per year, has a population of 891 million people. That means that the Americas is a home for 13% of the world's population, but it generates 34% of the world GDP. That ratio is pretty good, and we want to keep it as close to that as possible. Because if we don't do the right things, if we don't start moving into further integration and take the right steps, that perhaps will keep still the 13% of the world's population, but the percentage of the GDP is going to be eroding, and eroding. And guess where is it going to go? It's going to go west to Asia. Now, why the integration of the Americans is so important, and I emphasize that. Here you have your answer. The Belt and Road Initiative launched by the Chinese government. What you see in red and blue, by the way, is not Democrat or Republican, nothing to do with that. Red is the influence of China, blue is the influence of the US, and I will be a little bit more ambitious, and I will say it's more than the US, is the Western way of life. That's really what it means. So you can see, for example, Africa is a perfect example of what we want to happen in other parts of the world, particularly in Central and South America, is that it has been completely dominated by China, and with the exception of 3 or 4 countries, basically China is the king, and it dominates, sets standards and everything there. And it's going to be very hard to revert that. Not impossible, but it's going to be very hard. Now, what is happening now in that regards with this Belt and Road Initiative in Central and South America? We have some countries that have started to endorse the Belt and Road Initiative with all these loans that China is bringing to the table, and they appear to be very good, but they come with a lot of strings that are not very transparent. And some of the countries in South America are purple, so they are not red yet, but they have lost some of the blue. Now, does that mean that there's nothing that we can do about it? No, absolutely not. This is the time to start thinking differently, and more importantly, start acting differently. So think globally, act locally. And when I say locally, I mean regionally, probably. That's a more appropriate term for this. This chart here is what the Chinese government has projected with their geopolitical influence to be in the next 70 years. And that rectangle that you see right there, that it says most dangerous time, that's where we are right now. So if we don't implement, and when I say we, I mean the business community, I mean the government authorities, I mean the different countries that are part of this continent, then this is likely what we will see, in which by the year 2049, according to the projections of the Chinese Communist Party, the influence, geopolitical influence and economic influence of the West and the US as the leader of it will reach the same level as China. And then it will be in decline going forward. And then, again, if we don't do the right things now, then we will end up in a world dominated and completely controlled by China. So, food for thought, I want you to take home and think about it. So now let me switch this seat. We know that the economies of the future are really based on technology. We see that already, and I think it's very tangible. Now, Canada is a very important player in the mining world. By the way, what you see in that chart are the strategic materials that are needed to maintain and sustain technology development. That comes with communications, defense, medical, military, really, really essential industries. And today, of the world known reserves, China holds 30%, Russia has 9% of those. So I think it will be a little bit naive to expect that going forward, we can continue to rely on China or Russia to provide those strategic components. I don't think it's going to happen, and we can see the writing on the wall. Now, other countries, Vietnam is a big player, it has a good chunk of reserves, but the next bigger chunk that exists today is in Latin America, and that includes Mexico all the way to the land of fire in Argentina. And that part of the continent today has 40% of the world's known reserves of those strategic minerals. Now, Canada, it's a big player in mining, and it has a long tradition, so I would like to, John, if you can share with us, what is Canada doing today in that regards, because this is strategic, and it's kind of one of the cup of teas of Canada, and I think we have a lot to learn from the Canadian experience. In addition, I would also like you to comment on an initiative that Canada took even before the US that is called the Critical Minerals Strategy, because they saw this coming earlier in the game, even when the frictions with China just started. So please share with us.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here and joining you today and to speak about this important topic. Open trade is really important for Canada, and we're really keen on working with our allies, especially the United States and Mexico, and the USMCA is a cornerstone of our trading relationship. But we're also very interested in expanding trade and expanding open trade and a rules-based trade system. I think the presentation is very interesting, and we share your concerns about China's domination or its influence on the global trading system and some often on-market influences that can distort markets. And I think you had a good presentation in that regard. And one area that's a little concern for Canada is in the area of minerals. It's something that we're very focused on in the last few years because of the importance of critical minerals for us, particularly for clean energy, and for us to meet our climate action goals, and I think for national security reasons as well. China controls much of the supply chain. So for Canada, we have a goal of creating secure access to critical minerals. And we're one of the few countries in the world that has all of the critical minerals required for batteries, particular batteries for electric vehicles. And we're working closely with the United States to increase the extraction, processing, and recycling capacity of critical minerals and battery inputs. And we've, just last month, Canada announced a critical minerals strategy in our federal budget, which was a $3.8 billion strategy, which includes, I think most importantly, $1.5 billion for infrastructure, and that's because a lot of the critical mineral reserves in Canada, the deposits, are in remote areas. So we have to invest in infrastructure, and that's one reason why we haven't developed our critical mineral mining to the extent of other countries. So we have to invest in infrastructure. We've put aside $1.5 billion to invest in projects with the private sector for mining, processing, and recycling. We've doubled the mineral exploration tax credit for targeted critical minerals. So that's nickel, copper, cobalt, rare earths, and uranium. And we're investing $225 million in research and development to get better at responsible extraction and processing, as well as providing public access to the integrated data sets that are required for critical mineral exploration. And then we're also investing in northern regulatory processes. Like I said, a lot of the deposits are in northern areas of Canada, and we have to better develop our regulatory processes that make sure they're efficient and get the job done without taking too much time. And in this regard, Quebec and Ontario, two key areas with large northern deposits, have both announced their own complementary strategies in critical minerals. And so I think our plan is for Canada to become a secure source of critical minerals, which I think is really possible due to our geographic advantage. We have abundant clean electricity, clean energy that can be used, and then our high environmental standards. So we're working closely with the United States, and I think I know the United States is investing in critical mineral to increase the production of critical minerals. And I think as we do this together, it can be something an initiative that can take advantage of Latin America's deposits as well. And maybe talk a bit later, but Canada has a lot of mining expertise and presence in Latin America in the mining sector that I think would be very useful in that regard. Maybe else.
Thank you very much. Let me show you another slide here. And Cesar, one of the reasons that China actually one of the reasons that China gained this status as the factory of the world, not the only one by the way, but one of them 30 years ago, an important one, was the fact that they had a very abundant and affordable labor cost. And of course, it provided also a lot of incentives, energy-wise, tax-wise, etc., etc. However, if we review what has happened with the labor cost in China, in that chart that we have right there, in the last from the year 2000 to the year 2020, we can see how the cost of labor in China for manufacturing, this is by the way an average cost, of course there is more sophisticated manufacturing, less sophisticated, but it's just to illustrate the point, because across the board it's the same behavior. So we can see how the cost of labor in China at that time was lower than that, the equivalent of in Central America, in Mexico, or South America. But today, it's significantly higher, and there's no indication that this is going to change. In fact, in the best case scenario, it might reach a plateau, but I have my doubts about that. So today, we look at those numbers. The cost of manufacturing in Mexico, Central and South America are significantly lower. So tell us about how is Mexico benefiting from that, and also I took these numbers from the source, that's what I mean. The Boston Consulting Group, in terms of the competitive index of Mexico, and it's right there in red. And we can see that it's actually playing better than China and Vietnam. So can you comment on that? Because I think this has been a good job done by Mexico, and a lot of work has taken place to get there.
Thank you very much. Well, I would like to take on the last comment, the last part of your comment, because in fact, I mean, the bottom consulting group, put Mexico in a very competitive position, it's a very competitive index. Even, compared better to countries like Vietnam or, some Asian economies like Vietnam or even India. In this, I believe, it has to do with an economic development, and I think it has to do with trade development. I mean, in Mexico has become a trade power in the world. And we have developed a very strong industrial base. I mean, from being a country mostly focused on primary products, like oil, especially. Now we are a manufacturing country. And I mean, since the opening of the economy in Mexico, labor, or I would say salaries in Mexico have raised significantly. And with the recent reforms in Mexico, and we have a very ambitious reform on labor, very recent, because as you know, if you're familiar with the business and political environment in Mexico, President López Obrador put a lot of, it is at the center of his agenda, labor standard, to raise labor standards in Mexico. And because of that, he has put in place a very ambitious reform that provides for more workers' rights and workers, I would say, capacity of bargaining power, with unions. So what I wanted to tell you is I think we have been, I don't want to tell it how, but we have been kind of successful in this progress on salary raising in the past few years, and thanks to our, I think, economic policies and openness to global trade.
Can you also comment on I think one of the components, not the only one, I don't know if it's the most important, but certainly important, that provided that competitive rate is also the infrastructure in terms of roads that Mexico has. The fact that it can actually move cargo very well through the network of highways, and that makes it, I think, it's part of that grading. Can you comment on that as well? Because I think it's a very important piece. Now, in particular, that we're dealing with a lot of sea problems in transportation and unpredictability and higher costs and so on.
Well, that's, thank you. Yes, let me put you, I was saying, since the opening of the economy in Mexico, we are very deeply integrated, especially in North America. And after 29 years now of the NAFTA and now USMCA, our trade is equivalent to $1 billion a minute. So it's a figure that, sorry, $1.2 million a minute. Sorry, I was exaggerating. but that even though it's huge, and 85% of the trade in Mexico with the United States crossed by land. So this trade, or this is very eloquent about the network, the connectivity between our countries. And this is why, for example, a few weeks ago, what's happening in Texas, and I don't want to talk much about that, disrupting trade and disrupting a crossing point, it could be, very disruptive for trade. But what I wanted to tell you that we have, I have some figures here, 27,000 kilometers of railway, 117 ports, 76 airports in place, and 172,000 kilometers of road. So what I'm saying is that we have a very robust infrastructure, and we are building more. I mean, I think, we are developing more, infrastructure, especially, in the interoceanic corridor that we are building in the South. So what I'm saying is that we have a very robust infrastructure, especially because we are fully integrated with the US. We have a very strong production platform with the US in specific sectors such as the automotive, the electronics, and for many other medical devices.
Now, today, we look at the free trade agreements that we have in North America, and some of the most important in South America, where we see that the US has free trade agreements with 20 countries, Canada with 51, Mexico with 56, but I want to pay attention to this: Colombia 65, Peru 53, Chile 64, and Panama 20. Now, what are the main products that our neighbors in South America export today? Crude oil, copper, metal, raw materials. So, and some of these are used for energy applications. So now I would like to ask John, what are the initiatives that, I do know that Canada has been traditionally a good investor in local energy, and how those raw materials that today are being extracted from these countries and taken to China for transformation, so they are taking actually raw materials and completely doing all the transformation in China and then bringing them back as finished goods. So guess what happens? China is keeping all the value added, and these countries in the South and South America are actually living models from the 19th century. We know that they are not going to get very far selling raw materials. So Canada has a long tradition of investment in industries for clean energies, and particularly, I think John made a little bit of reference about, I guess, lithium for electric batteries and electric cars. But I would like him to expand a little bit, to elaborate on that, if possible. Thank you.
We've called it, so you can listen.
Have a break here.
Thanks. Well,
You need
I
my
think it's true that
like surplus.
Sorry, is that better? So so I think Canada, like I mentioned, in terms of talking about critical minerals, that we're very interested in clean energy transition in Canada, and one of the things that we're doing, we want to develop our critical minerals supplies, but we don't want to just be a producer of rocks that we then ship outside of the country, and we also don't want to be dependent on insecure supply chains that critical minerals come from China. So we're very much interested in working with our allies to create critical mineral and supply chains that move into electric vehicles and batteries, and that we can work with our partners to have our integrated supply chains. And I mean, today we have very integrated supply chains in the automotive sector, in the Great Lakes region, the province of Ontario, and Michigan and Ohio, Indiana are all very, New York, Pennsylvania, have very integrated assembly and parts producers, and I know Mexico also has in the southern U.S. integrated supply chains. We'd like to use that as an example where, and linking that to clean energy and critical minerals, where we've
You guys good? Can you trim?
So we've to try to create these supply chains that come from the critical minerals. We've tried to develop electric vehicles, and so first of all, we've just announced that we're creating electric vehicle targets so that new cars sold in Canada by 2026, 20% of them will be electric vehicles, and then 60% by 2030, 100% by 2035, and then we have electric vehicle incentives, which we've expanded and extended to make sure that they're affordable for Canadians, and then we're investing in electric vehicle charging stations across the country, so we can have another 50,000 new chargers. And I think the plan is that we'll have electric vehicle market in Canada, and then from there we want to use our critical minerals that we're developing with our partners, and then have batteries, the inputs into batteries, battery production, and electric vehicle parts and assembly production in these in our existing automotive supply chains to take advantage of what's already there. And then recently we've seen some good news in that Stellantis has announced a battery production facility in Windsor, Ontario. General Motors has announced a battery precursor production facility in Quebec. General Motors is about to start producing its all-electric delivery van in Ontario at the end of this year, and both Stellantis and Ford have been retooling, plans to retool some of their Ontario batteries to create and assemble electric vehicles in Canada, and that's good news for the entire Great Lakes region. And I know there's been already a lot of announcements of electric vehicle and battery production in the United States. So I think there's a good ecosystem that's being created where I think that we can do a lot of this work in North America and not be overly reliant on supply chains that are not secure. And then I think that sort of leads to your point about the FTAs that we have Canada and Mexico has 50 FTA partners, and the USMCA I think is really the core trade agreement for both of our countries. But we both have strong ties with Latin America, their trade agreements. We both have trade agreements with Europe and TPP. So I think we're really set to expand the trade in our region. And I think it would be really great if the United States went down that path to further expand its free trade agreement system as well.
I'll get back to this chance in a moment. This is the picture that I wrote. So, Cesar, get ready. This picture that you see right here is if we were to take the free trade agreements of Canada, the free trade agreements of Mexico, the free trade agreements of the US, and overpose them all together, this is what we get. The areas that you see in color is the countries that are covered through one of those agreements. Now, in the case of Canada and Mexico, they do have, as John well pointed out, free trade agreements with Europe. Okay, now this is much better, huh? I was saying that both Canada and Mexico do have trade agreements with the European Union, and that is a pretty good gate that if you are producing today in Asia or buying some of your basic components for sub-assemblies in Asia, you might not qualify for some of the benefits that some of these free trade agreements will bring to you. Now, what you see in this map, you see a little bubble here on the left-hand side. That's an infrastructure project that is taking place as we speak, and it's called the Eastman Train. That is actually in the narrowest part of Mexico. It's a train and a highway that will run in parallel that will connect the Atlantic with the Pacific Oceans. So you could potentially have a factory there, produce whatever kind of goods or transform anything that you need to, and from that same factory, take it out to the Atlantic or to the Pacific from the same factory without much transportation. Now, in addition, this location is strategic because it's very close to the Northern Triangle, where we have Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and it is an implication of national security for the U.S. not to have alternatives for controlling that, I would call it disorganized migration. This infrastructure project will create an industrial park that will be connected to the Northern Triangle countries of Central America. And it would provide an alternative to the Panama Canal, because I think in one of the presentations earlier, it was mentioned that the reality, if you go to the Panama Canal today, you reach the Panama, you have to wait 10 days, maybe sometimes 15 days, to get access to the canal. Just to get access. Once you get access to the canal, it takes about 10 hours to cross that tiny distance. And it's because of the way the Panama Canal works. You have to lift, basically, the boat to move it to the other side of the ocean. So it was a good thing 100 years ago. Today is probably not the optimal way, but it's the only way. So this infrastructure project will provide an alternative in North America to move cargo easily from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And in addition, as I said, it will provide some industrial parks. And this is where I want to ask Cesar to please help us to understand the status of that and give us a little bit more details about the industrial parks that are intended to be created there. Because this is an essential piece for starting the integration of Central America with North America. And let me ask the second question, Cesar, and I'm sorry, I hope that I'm not bombarding you too much, but in the CAFTA free trade agreement, I believe that Mexico with Central America operates in a similar fashion. There are some chapters that already contemplate the homologation of the content accumulation, which basically allows you, and this is the core argument of this initiative, to try to use, if the US has a free trade agreement with Guatemala, for example, if Mexico has a free trade agreement with Guatemala, if Canada has a free trade agreement with Guatemala, then homologate that so that a product that is initiated in Guatemala can move up to Mexico for the second part of transformation, and then maybe to the US or to Canada for final transformation and be considered a USMCA product. And like that, we can continue further south and then go to Colombia, then to Peru, and then to Chile, which there are free trade agreements with by Canada, Mexico, and the United States. So that is the core argument of this initiative. And there is an example already in the textile chapter that actually show us the light. What is the path that we need to follow in order to accomplish that? So without further delay, Cesar, you are the man.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to take first on the first part of your question. You're right. I mean, the interoceanic corridor is, without any doubt, one of the most ambitious and socially beneficial projects that is carried out at this moment in Mexico. I am certain that this project will become one of the engines for growth and development. It takes advantage, I would say, of the strategic position, the geographic location of the Istmo de Guadalupe, it offers, or could offer, done and completed, an alternative to move goods from one ocean to the other. This project, I mean, will, you also mentioned it, will create a logistic hub, between the two oceans through the combination of railways, highways, and cargo ships. And this, of course, will benefit 79 municipalities, communities in Mexico, in both Veracruz and the state of Veracruz and Oaxaca. According to the estimation, we can, move goods from one coast, from one ocean to the other, in 24 hours, and then 72 hours to be anywhere in the US or in a port in the US, Alabama, like that. And well, this is this will comprise the expansion of two major ports, the Salina Cruz in the Pacific, and Coatzacoalcos in the Gulf of Mexico, and and the modernization of roads. And as you were saying, it will establish also along 300 kilometers of the it will establish many industrial parks where you can actually transform goods and use something, and we believe it will be a very attractive location for the bank. So he was asking for the status. Well, in last March, President López Obrador went to the area and to review progress in the project, and he announced that the project has a 50% progress. And so hopefully we can, I don't remember exactly the date, that 60% progress is but well, in regarding the second part, yes, you're totally right. I mean, in the CAFTA, the US with the Central America, the agreement US, Central America, and the Dominican Republic, CAFTA DR, we have provisions that make accumulation of content accumulation of accumulation of origin possible between the US, Mexico using NAFTA, or not NAFTA anymore, the USMCA, and of course, the CAFTA DR. This is only, this is only working for the textile sector. I mean, the accumulation of origin is very technically very complex, but we have done, we have some good, let's say, example like this one I was telling you. We have done some work with the Associated States in the Pacific Alliance, not yet resolved. But we also believe that, not only this kind of provision, but integration can also be further by using, by using trade facilitation methods. By using cooperation on regulatory alignment, for example, or digital tools and tools of the digital economy. You can always facilitate trade and actually, make reduce cost, of course, and make trade or not trade, make easier for companies to comply with the standards. So I think this is a very good way, and this has been the focus for us working on that. For example, we are working also in customs. We are participating since October last year. We are participating in the logistic passport, or global logistic passport, which is an initiative of the United Arab Emirates, and we can, pull leverage from the business to make customs more aligned, linking customs through cooperation and facilitating trade. So my point is that we are using every single tool to integrate trade, facilitate trade, including origin in some cases for sectoral cases, and of course using regulatory cooperation
Thank you, Cesar. So, as I said, one of the core aspects of this initiative is the use of the existing free trade agreements, and through the content accumulation, be able to leverage and use the value that is being added. Let's say the product is being extracted in Colombia, instead of going to China as a raw material to be completely transformed there and then be returned as a finished good. which doesn't provide much of value to Colombia, is do the initial transformation on site in Colombia. And for example, I use the example of oil. Then from oil, the first transformation will be to transform that into some kind of resin and plastic, basically. Then goes up to continue the transformation in Central America or in Mexico, and then in the US or Canada, depending on the nature of the product. And I'll give you an example that illustrates this point very well in the automobile industry. For example, a piston that is used in an F-150 pickup truck starts its production in Michigan, then it travels south to Mexico, then it goes up to Canada, then goes back again to Mexico, and then goes up to the United States to be a finished product. Then it gets installed into the engine of this F-150 truck. And you might wonder, well, this sounds like a lot of traveling. Yes, but it's the most competitive way to do it and keep the quality and the cost as needed. And because the infrastructure developed by the automobile industry is so sophisticated and so robust, it's doable. And the idea is, why not to use the same concept for other areas, other sectors? It's perfectly doable. Now, regarding what we have in our closest, I will say, partners, let's say Colombia and Peru. This is a very interesting picture. You can see in the case of Colombia, the US is the prime customer, but China is catching up. It's getting very, very close. So that's why we need to start moving into this. Then in the case of Peru, I think we're coming a little bit late because China is now #1, but the US is #2. And there's still room for reshaping that. And as I showed to you, the main exports to China are raw materials. And as long as that's the case, there will be the willingness for them to explore different alternatives because they don't want to be living out of exports of raw materials. In the case of Chile, it's way more complicated. So the further south we go, it gets a little bit more complicated. You can see the difference between the presence of China and then the US. Nothing impossible, but we need to start in North America, expand to Central America, and then to the north of South America, little by little, going south. So now, I guess we are running out of time, so I would like to open space for a few questions, and then feel free to, shoot to any of the three of us.
Actually, two questions. One is in Mexico. You've got the BNSF railroad that goes from the U.S. into Mexico, and I understand the CP, the Canadian Pacific, is going to merge or buy the Southern. So both railroads go into Mexico. How deep into the country do they go? And I mean, we're having so many problems with the ships and the containers. I just see that as a nice option to have. So the question is, how far into Mexico did the railroads go?
If I'm not wrong, I mean, the railroads go very far to the south, even to the border.
To the border?
Yeah, I think so. That's correct. Or I can confirm that later if you want, but I am pretty sure that it goes all the way to the border. Well, of course, we need some modernization in some part, but the railroad goes.
So the infrastructure is there to get product into the U.S. from on the railroad. The other question is, I mean, we talked about China with the cost going up and everything, but of course, the problem that some of us have had is with the intellectual property being stolen in China. Has there been a big, obviously you mentioned the autos, but has there already been a resurgence of manufacturing? I mean, what we're talking about, there will be more. Is there a big trend already? Is that already happening?
I didn't get very well.
Okay. In China, there's been problems for 10 years with intellectual property being stolen.
Yeah.
So the question is, have many manufacturers already gone to Mexico?
Well, yes, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't be so sure, to tell you that it has that the reason why they have moved to Mexico. But I do believe that it's part of the reason. But there is also, some other competitive advantage that Mexico has. Including the neighborhood. Being in the neighborhood is good for more integration. But it's also, that we are building on, as I said, 28 years of integration. So now that the pandemic has, exposed our vulnerability and the need to get closer your supply chain, I think it has been an opportunity for Mexico and Canada, because we have proven to be reliable partners of the U.S. It has been 28 years, and so we are your closest allies, and I do believe that pays off. Especially nowadays, that when you really need to strengthen your supply chain, and you cannot rely on. You don't want more uncertainty. You really want to have a reliable supply chain.
In fact, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal that came a month ago that talks exactly about that, and it mentions some figures. I don't recall off the top of my head, but I have a copy at home of that article. That precisely the lower level manufacturing was starting to migrate to a significant number because the more sophisticated it's going to take 3 years. But the trend is the same.
I think that you were alluding to intellectual property issues in terms of China. How does that work in terms of Mexico and really the rest of South America? Intellectual property is something that I deal with quite a bit. Except Brazil, not in terms of stealing, but in terms of timing. There really is certainly in Mexico. There are no issues about intellectual property, and that I'm aware of in South America in general. There are no issues. Not like what goes on, not even remotely. The only issue in South America, Brazil, in terms of the length of time that it takes to get a patent, like in Brazil, it takes about an average of 8 years, versus in the United States, it's around. It kind of depends on the nature of the invention, but no, that is not concerned.
I have a little success story here.
Thank you very much, and thanks for everybody. My question is to Cesar. We are thinking about the possibility to open a private airport in Monterrey and to bring some of the issues or alleviate some of the issues that their LAX airport is causing. So maybe flying to Monterrey and have direct cargo traveling on the roads with Mexico. That's my new project right now. So what are the incentives that the government provides to companies that want to invest into the country and bring jobs and provide other things that will bring, at the end of the day, money for the investors, but also money to the country they are working in?
Thank you. If you want, I of course, I avail myself, for to, if you want to discuss more further this, because for the moment, of course, at federal level, the incentive per se, as the tax incentive or something like that, has been reduced significantly. This is, the administration, part of the policies that the administration has. But at the state level, they do have a lot of, different incentives, because they are autonomous, and you can find, very attractive incentive, and I believe that we can, I can help you find them in the sense that I don't have the list with me, but I am for sure I can provide them put in contact actually with the people in economic development at the state level. And of course, at federal level as well. No? So honestly, I don't know exactly what the kind of, I mean, the list of incentives that the state of Nuevo León has.
And I will add something, and I'm not part of the government, so I can say it freely. You can actually put the states to compete. You know, it doesn't have to be the state of Nuevo León. It could be Chihuahua, one of the states around. You can put them to compete, you know, and what you offer me, and what I'm going to sell. I can say that because I don't work for the government.
Ernesto, I have a question about.
Sorry, one second.
It is a very short. So since we're talking about metals, there's a company in Ontario called Violet. They manufacture nickel, and they need an inert gas. They take natural gas burning to have CO2 emissions. So instead of doing that, we built 2 nitrogen generators on them in Missouri that we exported to Canada. Now, nickel production in Canada will be a lot more environmentally friendly.
Thank you. Since the Latin America productive system is quite different from China's one, because Chinese is based on scale operations, large factories, and Latin America manufacturing system is based on small, almost entire family-owned small companies and business. Have you thought on how to enhance that system to absorb the demand for manufacturing processes that American companies, both American and Canadian and maybe Mexican companies, could be needing to attend all those needs, to meet all those needs?
Thank you. Yes, well, at the Ministry of the Economy, we are actually in charge of small and medium enterprises, and you're totally right. I mean, they actually comprise the most of the companies in Mexico, and generate the most of the employment in Mexico. But even though, I mean, they participate very little in export and so, yes, part of our, I would say, the trade policy of Mexico has 3 pillars in our case. And one of those is inclusion. I mean, how can we increase the number of small and medium enterprises? I mean, more companies exporting. How can we, expand the benefit of trade to less favored, let's say, group, including small and medium enterprises, indigenous communities, but even, we need to diversify even within the country. I mean, because most of the exports come from the state in the north of Mexico, and we need to include more states, and include, expand also the product base, because we are very concentrated sometimes. And even our export, I mean, the United States is our main export market, and still we only export to 15 states in the U.S. Make up for 70% of our trade. No? So this is the part of inclusion of that diversifying in that we are focused on. So what I'm saying is, and also, the USMCA has a complete chapter for small and medium enterprises cooperation. With the last 2 months ago, we just held the committee for small and medium enterprises in San Antonio, and we are working on that. I mean, we have a lot of initiatives and trying to, make to include or to facilitate to small and medium enterprises to participate more in the supply chains of big companies. So this is part of our work, this is part of our challenge, but this is also part of our priority. So in this, I can speak for the 3 continents. I mean, this is why the small and medium enterprise chapter of the USMCA is new. It's one of the 10 upgrades, I would say, 10 chapters that we gave an upgrade to our free trade agreement, and it is a priority.
think you spoke for Canada. I was going to say a similar thing about inclusive trade and supporting small medium-sized enterprises.
I actually have a question for Ernesto and indirectly for our guests from Canada and Mexico. This is a great initiative of the NADEC. Have you found partners to work with in the Canadian business sector, the Mexican business sector, and the broader regional business sector to work on to help advance this as a way to increase bring back the control of the supply chain in North America? Or at the moment, is this just a NADEC initiative and how will be sort of a future phase of moving it forward?
It's a great question, and thank you for it. The answer is both. I have had already conversations, and I've been approached actually by the Ontario and also the Quebec development agency, I think they're called. And basically, they are waiting for us to move on, but I'm being very patient because I want to put pieces together first before we start going further. Now, what they will do is they organize with some of the members of those organizations that need a particular type of component, material, product, or whatever, so we can do kind of a matchmaking, but then help them to enhance that process and do the integration. Or we will do the integration, they will do it, but we will kind of guide them in that direction. So that has happened, but I can't put it on hold myself because we want to be ready. And this is dancing, it's a fine line that we are dancing with because at the same time, we want to engage also the American administration, and we have been doing little by little, and so far it's working very well. I just had a visit to the Capitol this afternoon with the leader of the Senate, or the leader to be the Senate of the Senate, and they are very interested in hearing the story. So, but it's going to take some time before we are ready for approaching full speed that part. In the case of Mexico, there have been a couple of automobile organizations that have done similar approach, but that's the state at which it is. I think it's a matter for us to open the gate, but we gotta be careful when we open the gate. We don't want to be floated or inundated, I should say. Anybody else?
I have a question based on the slide you showed earlier pertaining to Peru versus Chile and how are we doing with U.S. versus Peru, U.S. versus Chile, and obviously there's a lot more integration with China in terms of Chile. But do you think that if the Southbound initiative started picking up speed and started actually implementing that and started going to South America, do you think that's a consequence of the development of South America in terms of the integration of this initiative? Do you think that the dynamics would naturally change in Chile? Just because of the momentum, it's almost like a magnet, right? Once you have a magnet and you have a piece of metal and it attracts, and then it attracts another piece of metal, it attracts another piece of metal, it draws it, right? And so I'm just wondering as the initiative and the work that comes out of it starts getting some legs under it, whether the situation in Chile will change as a consequence.
Chile is the most stable, politically speaking, country in South America, with no doubt. Now, those figures that you see right there, in which China is a prime client, it has a justification. They produce copper, and they produce some materials that are widely needed by China to produce finished goods that they sell all over the world. So the question is, will Chile make a change? They could, but why would they, at this point, abandon China when it's a super good customer? Makes no sense. Now, when they see an alternative and they say, well, I could actually continue selling to China, no objection to that. They say, I have an alternative to sell north because I'm going to supply a market that is in the north or in South America, and we don't want it to come from China. We want it to come from the region. That's a different story. And that's this balance would be a little bit more 50-50, because still, there will be a big demand of the products that China produces in Asia, and it's okay. And why not Chile could continue selling those raw materials, but that probably will be more balanced. Now, for the consumption in Europe and in the Americas, that's a different story. And that, I think that's where the opportunity is. And the conversations that I have had with them is clear. Say, well, why would I change if I have a good client? I don't want to abandon a good client. Give me another client and I will start, shifting a little bit. It makes sense. So that is the background argument here, and it makes, to me, it makes a lot of sense. So there are opportunities to change that. Not completely eliminate China. That's not the purpose of this either. Is to have a more sustainable, healthy, and robust type of supply chain. Because as we saw with COVID, the one thing COVID did is it gave us a big lecture of how fragile, the fragility and of our supply chains, that it's so sustainable. And there are other topics about the risks of depending too much on China, but we run out of time. But I would be happy to explain why, as an entity, as a business, you don't want to completely depend on China because it's very dangerous. But that's a topic for another session. Anybody else? All right. This is a marathon. I'm doing my walking here. I need to go to the gym.
So we're a U.S. exporter for the Minister for Canada. Will there be a process for bidding from U.S., Canadian, or possibly Mexican suppliers? Will you start exporting this mining equipment and any preferential treatment, or how is the process going? Obviously, as a U.S. exporter, I would love to sell to Canada some U.S. products and help you find products that would be sustainable and also buying friendly.
They produce a lot of stuff in China.
Well, over as an item.
Okay, so that's good improvement.
Well, I think that the USMCA is really the basis for our trading relationship, and virtually everything is duty-free between our countries. And so I think our default position is that we would hope that our the trade between our countries would be the focus of developing these new resources in Canada, and the same thing for developing more mining in the United States, that hopefully Canadian companies would participate, and Mexico as well. So I think that the geographic proximity is really important for our companies to participate in all this new development that we expect. And I think that our trade agreement is really the basis for going forward.
Right. So anybody else? Good march.
Just in Canada, how are the environmental laws and certain topics, are they similar to the U.S. or is it more difficult, or is it like California or the rest of the U.S.?
See, putting California as an independent country already.
That's a tough question. I guess maybe just in the context of, from what I understand about mining, is that I've heard recently that permitting in Canada can be a couple of years, and in the United States it can be 10 years. So I think, and I know that we have challenges with our environmental regulations, and trying to balance that, the objectives of that, with trying to get economic development. And I know, like, one of our big problems is energy infrastructure. We can't get pipelines to get to the West Coast or East Coast, so our only market is the United States, which is good for the United States. But it's not good for us to, we can't expand our exports, and part of that is the going from regulatory processes. But I think it's something that we're working on, and I think it really depends in terms of comparing the U.S. and Canada. It depends sort of the issue.
All right, so count to 3. 1, 2. So all right. Well, please help me a big applause for my panel. Thank you very much. And I hope that this is not the last session. We'll probably have more by sector in the future. So stay tuned. Same channel, same time.